Thank you so much for inviting me here this evening. And thank you all for coming this evening. Before I actually start my presentation, I just want to say that my family has a very close connection to the pandemic because my youngest grandson was born 2 days after everything locked down. He was born on March 18th, 2020. And his name is Dean, so his parents, my daughter and son-in-law, nicknamed him Quarantine. So far, he's surviving. So we're now in the 27th month of the pandemic. And as of the beginning of this month, 1 million Americans have died, and about 80 million have suffered from the virus. And it's probably more because many of the confirmed cases were not reported as COVID-related. And because of the convergence of factors, some of which were real, others were myths, COVID has made many of us feel as though we're doing a giant balancing act on a tightrope over the Grand Canyon in gale force winds. COVID has given new meaning to previously used common words, such as quarantine, social distancing, which more accurately really should be called physical distancing, vaccinations and boosters. It has caused us to rethink how we approach daily activities. While most schools now are back in person, periodically they revert back to remote learning at all grade levels. Zoom used to just mean going quickly, but now Zoom has taken on a different meaning. It means the platform that we use to connect with our work and in our personal lives. We're told to wear a mask, and then we're told we don't have to wear a mask, and then we're told we have to wear a mask again. We experienced one-way aisles in supermarkets, and my favorite, the great American toilet paper shortage. We carry hand sanitizers with us wherever we go, and we use them. And let's not forget, almost all of our churches live stream their services. Many of us are suffering from COVID fatigue and burnout. It could be parental burnout and caregiver burnout. We're dealing with roller coaster feelings of fear, anxiety, anger, frustration, and sadness. Among some, their coping skills have resulted in an increased use and misuse of alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. Legal drugs, illicit drugs, as well as over-the-counter medications. For others, there's a worsening of chronic health and mental health conditions. We've witnessed confrontations between vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, and unfortunately that occurs frequently within the same family. And we've experienced a new kind of grief, mourning the loss of a loved one who we were not able to see and who died alone in the hospital at times when no visitors were allowed. And many people have said that they still have an irreparable hole in their hearts. Which brings us to tonight's program, being held in May, Mental Health Awareness Month. Knowing the people who organized this program, I don't think that was a coincidence. So what does mental health awareness mean for our community? Basically, it means that we are not immune. While 1 in 5 Americans suffers from a mental illness, whether schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, bipolar or borderline personality disorders, among the cases that I deal with in the Social Services Department of National Philoptochos, and my cases are from all over the country, about 40% of my cases are people who suffer from mental illness. And to address this prevalence, we modified our intake application form to ask people, is there a history of mental illness in your family? And if yes, would you like a referral to a therapist? For people who don't have health insurance, we offer to pay up to 10 sessions of counseling. We also ask if there are firearms in the household and how they are secured if they do have firearms. And that has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. It's important information that we need to know, especially if there are children in the family, if there's a history of mental illness or domestic violence in the household. The reality is that each of our cases, or social services cases, demonstrates the range and complexity of the issues that are faced by members of our own community. Some are traumatic, like the 36-year-old woman who was fatally stabbed by her husband in front of their 3 young children, and it was their 12-year-old who had to call 911. Or the teen mom, the mother of the teen, who found him hanging in his bedroom. And the question to this day is, was it suicide or was it an accidental death due to autoerotic asphyxiation? Other cases are more subtle, such as the man who believes, as he's walking along the street and he sees license plates, he believes that the numbers on the license plates are transmitting messages to him about when it's time for him to go back to Greece. When he told this to me, he looked at me with a little smirk and said, "That's pretty crazy, isn't it?" Maybe. We get messages from different places, what can I tell you? Another more subtle case is the hoarder, whose home was so cluttered that she had to crawl from one room to the next. She had 150 cats, which she faithfully fed, but she was unable to pay her rent. As a faith-based community, I'd like to say that we respond with kindness to those around us who are different. However, that's not always the case. Oftentimes we are quick to judge. Why didn't they know better? Why didn't they save? Why didn't they know that the event that they were going to was going to turn into being a super spreader? My answer, they didn't know because they didn't know. And because sometimes the path to good judgment is paved by a series of poor ones. In the case of the hoarder, should the penalty for her poor judgment be homelessness? Would we criticize her for rescuing and feeding cats if she weren't low income? Would we stigmatize her? I'm not going to answer that question this evening. However, a 2011 study that examined stigma and Greek families started off with, in ancient Greece, the word stigma referred to a mark on the body of a person who should be avoided. However, today, stigma is a sign of shame, disgrace, disapproval, and oftentimes rejection by the community. Because mental illness impacts not only the person with the behavioral issue, but also those closest to them, it is not only the patient who is stigmatized and rejected, but their family as well. And sometimes this rejection is due to lack of knowledge about mental illness. Other times it's the need to blame someone else. She's like that because of your side of the family, not mine. Other times it's because of gossip that is spreading rumors, falsehoods, and half-truths. Ultimately, both patients and family members have said that the stigma of mental illness and the rejection and isolation that it causes is more painful than the actual disease itself. Whether someone is suffering emotional distress because of COVID, or they meet the criteria for a diagnosable mental illness, or they have yet to find the path to good judgment, my hope for tonight's program is that we will create a church which many communities are calling mental health stigma-free zones. A church in which our brothers and sisters who face human service and mental health challenges will find acceptance, compassion, and hope, where they will feel comfortable turning to for help because they and we know that the church is a place in which we will be restored, we will be healed and loved, and a place that will help us find and build resilience. Resilience doesn't mean that we don't experience difficulties, nor will it make problems go away. But resilience does help us adapt to the adversities, stress, or traumas that life throws at us so that we can cope and manage as best as possible. Whether we are directly impacted by adversities or indirectly, the question that we ask is, what can we do to help us get through the day? Not necessarily get over whatever it is that life is throwing at us, but how do we get through it? How do we find the strength to move on? That said, please understand that there is no magic wand. Each of us reacts differently to the same or similar situations, and what may work for a friend or a family member may not work for you. So as we examine the following, I ask you to sort through them and think about which ones or combination of ones will help you build and strengthen your resilience. Let's start with self-care. Carve out time to be good to yourself so that you will have the energy to be good to someone else. Establish healthy habits such as exercising, proper eating and hydrating, and getting enough sleep. Most importantly, remember that the opposite of self-care is not selfishness. It is self-awareness. Next, think about what brings you joy, what makes you happy and brings you a feeling of calmness. When during the day can you make it a point to take a walk, to listen to music, to watch a funny movie, or at the risk of being gender biased, get your nails done or go shopping? A participant in a cancer support group that I had co-led had told us that she joined the book club, and the members of that book club knew nothing about her illness. All they knew about her was that she loved to read. Don't isolate yourself. Connect with others socially and for support. Churches are open again, and if it's been a while since you've attended liturgy, go again. Take your children, take your grandchildren, take a neighbor. Families and friends are gathering again, so think about which ones you will be comfortable attending. But keep in mind that some people may ask insensitive questions or make uncomfortable comments about the choices that you make in dealing with COVID as opposed to what they believe. So think about whether and how you will respond if this happens. You can't control what other people do, but you can control your reactions. Another thing that you can do is sit in silence. You may think this contradicts don't isolate, but it really doesn't. Sitting in silence lets us process the day's events and become more mindful of how we feel physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And speaking of mindfulness, consider mindful meditation. Mindful meditation can help us calm the panic and let go of negativity through exercises such as deep breathing. You can find guided mindful meditations online. Some are 10 minutes, some are 20 minutes. Acknowledge your feelings. You've reached a point where you've had it. Maybe you're exhausted, you're disappointed or sad because this isn't the life that you hoped for. Maybe you're angry or frustrated because you want to spend more time with your husband or your family, but your elderly father recently had to move in with you because he no longer could live independently, and he's taking up most of your time. Maybe you're wondering if you're a good enough Christian because not only are you angry, but you feel guilty because you feel angry. Maybe you think God is punishing you personally or us as a society because he is allowing COVID to happen. Acknowledge your feelings and know that it's okay not to be okay. And it's also okay to be angry at God. Talk to your children. How do your children feel about COVID and the changes in their lives? What are they hearing about in school and from their friends? What questions do they have about COVID and what is happening around them? And what does it mean? What does COVID mean in terms of their future hopes and dreams? Always answer truthfully and in age-appropriate language. And if you don't have an answer, say so. Tell them you'll get back to them as soon as you can. Also think about how you can teach resiliency to your children or grandchildren. My 2-year-old is not ready for that yet. If you find your children are becoming irritable, anxious, or depressed, or they're neglecting their schoolwork or their chores, and they're acting out in ways that they never did before, seek professional help for them. Next, I want to talk about reframing your thoughts and feelings and taking action. Don't ignore your problems because they're not going to go away. Sort through them and think about how to reframe them. You can improve your life if you work at it and if you remain hopeful. Think about how you coped in the past. Which of those coping mechanisms may work today? You know that your life isn't what you planned, but isn't it possible your life will get better again? And what steps can you take in order to make that happen? And rather than getting angry because you have to choose between your dad and, for example, helping your son navigate between adolescence and adulthood, think about whether your son can participate in some activities with your father, not with a caregiving, but reading to him, playing cards with him, just listening to music together. What about asking your son to do an oral history with your father? I do caution you, though, that sometimes in the midst of this process, we find that we're getting nowhere. And the reason is because we don't live in a perfect world. So I suggest that you take a step back, go into another room, and let out a blood-curdling scream. Yeah, just like in the movie Steel Magnolias. I have done that many times, and I have recommended it many times. I try to do it when nobody else is home, though. Practice affirmations. Start each day by giving yourself a positive message. I am a good person. I'm doing the best that I can. I don't have to be what other people want me to be. And recite phrases that reflect what you wish for yourself. May I live with health and free from pain. May I live with ease, peace, and joy. Look for the helpers. Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' fame said that whenever he saw scary things on the news, his mother would say to him, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." COVID helpers are the first responders, the health professionals who risk their own lives to keep us healthy. COVID helpers are our Philoptochos sisters who prevent evictions and mortgage foreclosures for people who lost their jobs due to the pandemic. And COVID helpers are members of our clergy who provide spiritual support to help us cope and carry on, and who ensure that we are not alone because God is by our side. And pray, whether out loud or silently, whether one time or many times, pray. At home, in your car, on the bus, in the subway, when you're shopping, whatever. But pray. The Jesus prayer. Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. The prayer bracelet has 30 knots. There's a reason that there are 30 knots, not just because of his age, but because we say that 30 times. And each time we say it, it calms us down. Another thing that we can do is say, Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. And one of my favorites is from the hymn to the Theotokos. more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without defilement, you gave birth to God, the Word. True Theotokos, I magnify you. Life as we know it has changed. It may never be the same again, the so-called new normal. But that doesn't mean that it is or it will be worse. It only means that it will be different. And with resiliency, we can all deal with something that's different. Thank you.